All right. Finish this off strong. Why don't you go ahead and we'll start quick introductions. As Corey mentioned, Jim Caruso, Chief Innovation Officer at Elevate. I run all of our product, technology, and data offerings. Kenny, why don't you?
Sure. I'm Kenny Gersh, Major League Baseball. I'm the Executive Vice President, Media and Business Development. So as of now, I oversee sort of all our media relationships, our national rights holders, ESPN, Fox, and Turner. Increasingly, our local media rights. So we have the Padres and Diamondbacks and Rockies sort of within our element that we're in the process of doing distribution deals for right now. But I also oversee business development, which includes sports betting. So a couple of years ago, when it was first, becoming legalized, it's actually what I focused on exclusively for a period of time, from like 2018 to 2020, and really seeing how the evolution happened, the lobbying that we had to do from state to state to get things legalized, including mobile betting that could allow for the conversation we're going to have today. Then I oversee minor league business operations and our other new business ventures and like Web3 stuff or just any other sort of new opportunity that comes along.
Not that busy then.
Yeah, no,
hanging out.
A lot going on these
Got it.
days.
Good. Go ahead, Javier.
Hello, everybody. Javier Vargas, CEO of BettorView. BettorView is a marketing and technology provider to virtually every regulated gambling operator in the U.S. and Canada. Prior to being at BettorView, is my fourth year. I've been in the industry for about 12 years. I was at DraftKings for roughly 6. While I was there, one of the things I observed, among others, obviously, was how underserved, underaddressed the way sports betting was presented to sports fans at venues, inclusive of stadiums. And so now our technology does quite a bit to address that. So I'm excited to share more.
Awesome. Thank you both for doing this. So I think we'll start. I want to kind of use this to explore I'll call it a tension, but I think there's an interesting interplay, right, between the fan side of this and the property or the league side. I think we'll start on the league side. So obviously, I know you're not in the teams, but you have obviously a purview. I'd love for you to give us a little bit of background on what the curve of adoption has been. And of the teams you mentioned that have adopted it, is that mostly governed just by state? Yeah, obviously, state law side having to legalize it. What are the other roles or variables that have gone into the decisions for them to do it or not?
Sure. It was kind of an interesting question as to do it or what it is. So for us, we have 17 of our major league ballparks are located in states where mobile betting is legal. And that, in and of itself is the differentiator as to whether a club can do something or not. All 30 of our clubs absolutely are eager to embrace sports betting.
Okay.
They see it, as a revenue driver, as an engagement driver. Every once in a while, someone who's not in a legalized sports betting state will try something, and we'll squash that. But there's sort of two different groups or three groups of clubs, I guess I would say. They're the ones that aren't in a legalized state at all. So really, there's nothing, although you still have fantasy and sort of daily fantasy. And I think you mentioned you're at DraftKings in ways that, that can come into the stadium and the sports watching experience in a similar way that sports betting is now. And then again, you have the clubs that are in legalized sports betting markets, all of which at this point have sponsorship deals with one or more of the one or more of the clubs, and are embracing it in different ways. And then we have 5 clubs where the law in that state specifically allowed, for a variety of reasons, for them to have an actual retail sports betting book essentially at their ballpark. So for us, it's Washington, D.C., the Nationals. It's sort of a funky little thing where it creates this exclusivity zone around the park where the mobile app works, and then you have the BetMGM. Sorry, the BetMGM thing there. You have the Cubs did a deal with DraftKings in Illinois to open a sports book at Wrigley Field. I think at this point it's sort of a glorified restaurant lounge. They haven't actually started taking bets yet because Chicago, Illinois, things get complicated. And then we have Arizona, who did open a sports book, a couple of years ago with Caesars. That's done really well. And then we have the 2 Ohio clubs. So Cincinnati has a deal now with BetMGM also, and the Guardians have a deal with BetFanatics. Those both just launched sort of mid last year, so they're sort of new and getting off the ground. I don't want to monopolize the whole thing, but I can
No,
talk
no.
a little bit more about how each of those are structured and what's important. I mean, you asked sort of why they embraced it or didn't. Like, again, it really had to do with the lobbying and the efforts and who had the political power in each of these states at the time in order to get the right to have, the sports book there. And it was interesting for us because in those states, it sort of recognized the power of sports, not just baseball, but all sports, and the role they were playing in sports betting. That, you had in certain states, the relative might of the existing casinos, and in these states, it sort of saw the value of the clubs, and it gave them some benefit to have this, which allowed them to do more valuable sponsorship deals and sort of pass through that license to these books. So that was a positive.
No, that's a good segue, because I want to get into the media side of this and to your point, the ancillary benefits. Obviously, you can't give numbers, or I'm assuming you can't, but generally speaking, the ones that have adopted it, and I know some are super early, the trajectory of that as percentage of how does that evolve? Do you think it's, hey, this is more of a test, like they're not counting on, right? This is a new revenue stream.
When you're talking about the retail sports books, is that
Correct.
what you're asking?
Yeah, the ones that have the retail. Yeah.
Yeah. So to be clear, the retail sports books are very specifically not the clubs. They all have, an operator. So it's BetMGM or it's Caesar, or whatever. So for them, there's a share in revenue. We never, at baseball, whether it's a club or the league, we never share in the actual revenue of a sports book, which is dependent on sort of wins or losses, sort of affects their revenue.
Sure, yeah.
What we do at the league level and what clubs are allowed to do, and where a lot of their sports betting deals are done, is they can share on, at least as it relates to baseball, at the handle level. So we're incentivized to help drive traffic, to drive betting volume, but again, we don't want to be associated in any way with which particular team wins or loses.
Yeah.
And then there's the the food and beverage revenue, which is important and drives that. So it's a combination of like lease payments, handle payments, and then the food and beverage payments. And again, it's done well so far in DC. It's done well in Arizona. Those books have been performing, I think, up to expectations. The clubs and the sports book seems happy with them.
Okay.
And the other ones, again, are just getting off the ground, so it's too early to really see how they'll go.
Awesome. That's super helpful. So maybe a little bit outside of baseball too, right? Your perspective on, I think how you're seeing, is it similar to what Kenny's mentioned? Is it different? And I think for the audience too, understanding where some of these leagues are ahead, behind, would love to understand your perspective on that.
Yeah, Kenny alluded to, early days. And I think a lot of people in this room might feel like sports betting's essentially been here forever, and really that's not the case. It's still very early, still a very nascent offering. And so accordingly, I think what the operators are doing right now with their team partners are obviously executing, maybe a bit too narrow-minded in terms of user acquisition. So it's very transactional. It almost feels like, again, because it's early, sports betting as an activity, it's just kind of been bolted onto the game day experience. And the operators, a lot of what they're doing is really being very direct response about the way they market. They're trying to just drive measurable user acquisition. And so I think that's appropriate for where we are. These operators are competing very aggressively with each other for customers. In addition to needing now to show a path to profitability, these team partnerships are relatively speaking meaningful investments for them. And so again, from my perspective, where I sit in the industry, it all kind of makes sense. But in terms of who's ahead and who's not, it feels like from where I sit, regardless of league, agnostic of league, it's all more or less the same. And I think, we'll get to it probably later on this panel, but the evolution of that, I think, is what's really more interesting. Again.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, as you kind of alluded to this, the impact, and I want to go back to a point you made too about the teams. It sounds, I don't want to put words in your mouth, it sounds like the thing is, if this is legal, if I can do it, the team, they're going to do it. They want to do it, they're embracing it. In terms of beyond that, the challenges of creating a space, are there any logistical things? Are there any things that as a team, you're going, hey, I would love to do this, but this just isn't, I didn't get the sense that there was, but have there been any objections, or are there any issues from that standpoint?
Again, if you're talking specifically about the retail sports book, I don't know enough on the the White Sox haven't done it yet because there were some challenges as the stadium there.
Okay.
They own it, but I'm not knowledgeable enough to get into why they didn't. So there are sometimes logistical things that will that will prevent it, but for the most part, the opportunity to actually sort of, they were essentially granting license. They were market access deals in some of these states
Okay.
too, where like Caesars got into Arizona through this market access deal with the Diamondbacks that then gave them this retail sports book. So the opportunity was so big that the legislation in these couple of states sort of opened up that the clubs were going to make it work. Now, we had different rules in place. We were fairly, let me go big picture for a second, if that's okay. So going back to, again, when I said I was focused on this sort of full time and the laws were coming in, the way we looked at sports betting for baseball, we always talked about sort of three main pillars. Like, how can we use it to increase revenue, which is sort of an obvious one, and that was the opportunity. We used to always say, just as important, if not more important, is how do we use it to increase engagement, or a lot of this stuff comes into. And I don't know that we've really scratched the surface on that yet. And the third pillar is how do we do those first two things while maintaining the integrity of the sport? And that sort of has two variables to it. One, sort of going back to what I was saying before about making sure if we take a share, it's only on handle, it's not on revenue. We want to make sure there's never an appearance of impropriety. But the other one is baseball is at its core a family-friendly sport. Like a day at the ballpark with your kids is sort of Americana. You know, we had over 70 million fans come in the stadium this past year, you know, for the first time in a long time, which is great. So we want to make sure we really always protect that sort of element of the family-friendly sport while we start introducing some of these things in what we think is a socially responsible way. So we do have sort of limits on how much we're going to allow, you know, betting content within the game, and we try to keep the, you know, to the extent we're going to do a call to action. And now I'm talking, sorry, about not just the retail, but like
I want to
really
expand the conversation there.
It's really, to me, that's the bigger thing, which I'm sure
for
what, you know, the content that you'll bring into the ballpark relates to it too, is the fans with the phone in their hand as opposed to going into the retail sports book. And so how do we sort of keep those two things, you know, in parallel, the reach and the engagement, but not over gamblifying? And I think, you know, we're starting slow and seeing how that goes. And that's where the sports books over these past couple of years have really been focused on entering new markets and getting their apps up and running. And it's been such a convoluted thing that the product innovation, I think, is now really starting to come now that they have that behind them that we can really help to use for engagement drivers. And that's sort of, we're just at the beginning of it, but I'm going to shut up for a minute.
No, this is great. I wanted to expand it to your point about not just the retail side, but also the digital side. So we'll come back in a second, because I do want to ask you about how you see that impacting what you said, which is the fan experience, right? But I think, Javier, as you think about, again, yes, there's only going to be one physical, I think, maybe one physical space, and maybe allowed 2 or 3, I don't know, what we'll say. But assuming that's the case, the impact to this in terms of the fan, in terms of all the other things that are happening, right? It exceeds just going into that physical retail sports book. So, you know, we were talking a little bit, we were backstage of what are all the other ways that you're enabling that, both from a team standpoint, right, to monetize different things in terms of media, you know, things like that, but also from the fan standpoint. It'd be great to hear a little bit about how those implementations go, right? When you go into a club and you say, hey, we want to, you know, we realize fans are doing this, we realize they're going to engage, whether you want to or not, right? Like, why don't you be part of that experience? How do those conversations unfold?
Sure. Well, Kenny alluded to this, but really all the leagues, you know, kind of implemented introductory first phase frameworks that, again, I think are very appropriate, establishing a baseline, making sure that sports betting, you know, I used the words bolted on earlier, but they've been added to the experience, making sure that, you know, it's in a way that's very measured, it's not too invasive or disruptive, establishing a baseline and then expanding on it from there. You know, so for us, what that means often is our technology at the Cincinnati Red Sportsbook with BetMGM, at Chase Field with Caesars, it's the custom branding, it's the advertising, it's the implementation of the integration of odds, and then also responsible play. That's another thing that the teams and the operators really value our technology for is education. How can this be entertainment and not a win-loss proposition? It's not a get-rich scheme. So our technology is leveraged for those purposes. When we're hired to do in-person activation, and the teams have done a really good job of ensuring that our ambassadors are required to be in specific zones that are typically age-gated, so you can't have a kid walk up to one of our ambassadors and ask about sports betting. So again, those are just some ways in which we engage the clubs.
Can you give us some examples of things that's gone really well. Hey, this team, you don't have to use the team even, but hey, we had this team who was reluctant maybe, but we ended up doing it this way, and they really embraced it, and here's why. There was kind of a case study for success, or you could do both. Either ones where it didn't work, right? Where hey, they tried to do this, they embraced it, but fans were not, they didn't like it, they didn't take to it. What do you have any examples of kind of either opposite end of the spectrum?
No, the in-person activation was limited. The ceiling was lower in part because we were in very gated areas, almost hard to get to. If you think about fans in a parking lot, they're tailgating and then they're making their way to the stadium. So if you have in-person activation that's permitted, but you have to take a circuitous route to get there, it's going to be difficult to scale user acquisition and awareness. But on the other,
what sport was that? Sorry.
Football.
Football.
Yeah, and then conversely, our technology. I mean, that's where at least the gambling operators really appreciate that. They're able to leverage our tech to very easily, in a way that's very nimble, get custom ads up that are specific to the game day experience and reach fans that way in a way that's branded according to them.
So you use the keyword, operators, right? Yep. There's a bunch of them. What role do you play in that thing? So I'm just making it up. BetMGM is an official sponsor of Venue X, whatever. People are on all different apps. You can't control what they're using. How do you guys play in that world? How are you guys? Is it anyone can use the app? Just give us a little bit of insight into that. I think
so. It is operator agnostic, but BettorView is not just one playlist or one loop. It's custom branded, right? Okay. So if I alluded to Chase Field in Arizona with Caesars,
sure,
and the Reds ballpark and sportsbook at Cincinnati with BetMGM. Ideally, according to me, you wouldn't be able to tell that those are both BettorViews. So those are both completely custom branded according to their brand guidelines. It almost looks like BetMGM is running their technology at their sportsbook with their ads, their responsible gambling messaging, Jamie Foxx, and then you've got Caesars, Chase Field in Arizona, again, a branded version of our technology with their ads, their messaging, et cetera.
Got it. And I guess so for on your side as well, like how do you think about that competition? Is it the same thing? I'm guessing exclusive. Have you been approached where it's like, hey, listen, I understand that we bought the rights to the state, but we can't limit users, right? To these. Do those conversations ever come up in this? And
yeah, unless you're in DC and they have this exclusivity zone around the ballpark. The only thing you can actually use it as a mobile app is BetMGM. But again, that has to do with the particular legislation there. Otherwise, it's a sponsorship deal, essentially. The retail book there plays a big part of the sponsorship deal. And clubs will also carve up their sponsorship deal. So each of the clubs that have retail parks also usually have a secondary sports betting partner as well. But then for us, it's about how much, again, going back to that family-friendly nature, do we let it seep into the game? So we have a couple of sort of ways that the clubs can benefit their sponsor and their sports book, which we allow sort of like 2 mentions during the game of a call to action or something to place a bet. We try to never, one of the things we're very cognizant of, despite the family friendliness that we talked about, going back to that integrity of the game issue, is we never want like a PA announcer to say like, oh, the odds that Aaron Judge is going to hit a home run right now is X, because Aaron Judge is a real, actual, physical human being who's up there at the plate and needs to do the job. And so
just the stat.
We don't want that like, that the sports betting to sort of seep into the game itself and to make sure we're protecting the players from the fans who feel like, I have a bet on this, this guy needs to perform that way. So we try to be very careful about that, not doing things in player areas or sort of during the game, and I'll talk about the odds, but we do think there's an opportunity to do things of, they small, and to your point about keeping it as entertainment and not, money-making opportunities, small free bets or odds boosts or wagers that if you're in the ballpark by coming to the game with your mobile device for a particular sponsor activation, you would get a special odds boost or a free bet for that game, or a way to get some special benefit from a combination of both being physically present in the stadium at that time and to using a particular sportsbook's app. So to sort of tie that to what you're asking.
Right. Yeah. On that note, I was curious about, thinking about a little bit further ahead, how does this evolve, right? And so many of these parks now are trying to figure out how to monetize their space, right, all year round, right? So we're at the Fenway, you can get married, right? Now, right? Yeah, there's a space back there and everything, have you guys had conversations? Has there been, are those physical sports books open year round, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember when we were first talking to the Cubs and you talk about where it's located and what they want to do. So we don't allow the sports book to be, we call within the actual physical footprint of the ballpark. We want it sort of outside the ballpark. We don't want there to be essentially you're coming to a baseball game and there's betting windows there.
Yeah.
But it can abut the ballpark, which may be a bit of a distinction. But like the Cubs would talk about, well, we want, this sports book to be open during March Madness, and we'll do overflow sort of into the stadium, and so people can be sort of, milling around and coming into the sports book. And that's a use case, again, once they start actually taking bets, that makes sense. So you get people in there in March while we're still in spring training before the games have started, and really for that experience. Or the Super Bowl, you could see that type of thing happening. Or, at other points of the year where there aren't baseball games happening in the stadium, that you use that space in conjunction with the sports book to have bigger social gatherings.
Sure, that's awesome. A little bit about our, as we get into thinking about the ROI of this. So I'm curious from your perspective, as you guys are implementing this for a team, on behalf of a team, what are the metrics that they're looking at? It's always making money, right? But I think it's a lot more than that, right? Because to your point, you made this point a couple times, right? At what expense, right? Do we feel like we're going to start to alienate fans? Do we feel like the experience is going to change so much because this has now become such a part of what we're pushing forward, and it's detracting from the? There's a lot. We could go on, or we don't have a few minutes left, but curious to hear. I think it all starts with, well, what is our metric for success, right? And so as a team is thinking about going in, and whether it be your technology, you could talk more broadly as well, but obviously you want to hear about how you guys think about it. What are those things that they're looking at and measuring, both from a positive standpoint, but also potentially from a negative standpoint? Is it, whether it be fan feedback or things like that? Is that part of this, and how do they look at that?
Yeah, in terms of what they're measuring, it's registration, so new user signups, it's deposits, how much are they depositing, how much are they betting after they deposit, which is fine. But, like Kenny's alluding to, what I'd like to see is, them consider, beyond that, right? So not everybody wants to place a same game parlay, and that's okay. If you're at the stadium, can you incentivize, betting activity that complements what they're there to do primarily, which is watch the game? That might be bet on your favorite player, right? Bet on the likelihood of a home run. No different than, hey, I might have a hot dog today, right? Like everything else should kind of coalesce around the main activity, and it's just entertainment. You're here to have fun. Inevitably, some of these people will translate into maybe, higher volume, higher ceiling gamblers. But, I think not that one size fits all messaging of same game parlay or a 19-leg parlay and get rich, but instead, make it okay and accept the fact that some of the fans will adopt sports betting in a way that is entirely just a way to complement what they're there to do. And from there, make it so that, okay, it stinks my team lost, but I had a great time. I had a great meal, placed the bet, it won, right? Like, how can you, again, support and complement what they're there to do, which is to watch sports and have a good time.
And that's those obviously are more from the operator standpoint. Do you, meaning signups, but from a team, do you have any kind of knowledge from a team standpoint, right? Because to your point, right, it could be, hey, I went to the game, I was having a good time, I lost a ton of money, now I'm not having a good time, even though the team's doing how much you guys interact with the teams in terms of what, operators are super happy, hey, we're doing great, we've got a lot more signups, a lot more deposits, a lot of activity. Do you ever hear any feedback from the team side as it relates to the experience?
We haven't, other than just that general embrace of the category.
Okay.
Like you alluded to, they want it. If they're not in the market, they want it.
Sure.
It's naturally gamifying the experience further.
Yeah.
It's making it so that if you're going to lose, your home team is losing, but you can still gamble, people are paying attention more. All the things that we've been hearing about are true.
Yeah.
But in terms of, is it driving incremental food and beverage sales, apparel sales, I'm not sure.
Sure.
But I'd like to think it likely does.
Yeah. Do you have any?
Yeah, I'll say, we have like a minute left.
Please.
Everyone's going to go run over and see Stephen A. Smith. But, I think my closing statement on the conversation is, we never want the ballpark to be a place where you come to bet.
Right.
We want the ballpark to be a place where you come to watch a baseball game. But we do think that betting on the game while you're there, for a certain group of people and a growing group of people, can help it enhance the experience.
Yeah.
Just this week, it was an obvious example, but I was invited by a partner to go to the Knicks game. I'm not a Knicks fan. I'm a fan of someone else. They were playing the Hawks. Trae Young was out. R.J. Barrett was out. So it wasn't like a star-studded affair. We were there. We were deciding whether we were going to stay the whole time. The Knicks were getting killed. And I was like, all right, I bet a live in-game bet of the Knicks plus 10.5. So now I was vested in that game. Like, it was a small wager, but it was like, it made it fun. I'm like, are they going to come back and only lose by 10? And unfortunately, they lost by 14 or something, so I lost the bet. But it just made it more exciting and made me stay till the end of the game to see if that was gonna pay out. So I think that's a good sort of use case for how this stuff can enhance sports, enhance the in-game experience and sort of make it a little more fun and entertaining while you're there.
Love it. Thank you. Any last thoughts, words, comments?
No, again, I'll just
What
kind
do
of
you
double
see?
down on, where I'd like to see it go is what Kenny's saying, not try to replace or supersede what people are there to do, which is watch the sport, but instead complement it and reinforce the fact that from a sustainability perspective, whether it's, how sports betting is perfectly positioned around, the sports that they're aligned with, it's entertainment. It's fun. I think that's ultimately how it's going to be sustainable and how it'll scale.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. Thank you for
you.
the
Thank
audience
you.
as well. Appreciate it.